Hello, welcome, welcome. We're going to give people a few minutes to join, and then we'll go right into the topic of today's webinar. Alrighty, as people join us, if you have any questions throughout, feel free to add them directly to the chat. Just make sure you're sending the question to everyone and not just host and panelists, and feel free to interact with the chat itself. So we're going to dive into today's topic, which is an AI and data-driven approach to leading transformation. And today, our webinar host is Nellie Wartoft. She is CEO and founder of Tigerhall. Go ahead, Nellie.
Thank you. Thank you, Julian. It's great to see you all here. Thank you for taking the time for this session today. As Julie said, feel free to use the chat throughout. I have the chat window open, so I will see your questions and your comments and so on as we go along. I have a lot of content for you today. So there's going to be a lot of detail. We're going to cover a lot of ground within this topic because it is a big topic. And I have a lot of information on the slides. But you're all going to receive the slides afterwards. We're going to walk through this, and I'll highlight the key things and so on. And then afterwards, you're going to receive the slides so that you can go in more detail as well. And I'm always open for follow-up conversations. And if you have more questions or want to dive deeper in anything, just let me know anytime. And I'm always happy to spend one-on-one time. So with that, let's dive into the topic of 2025 or 2022 to 2025. AI never ends, does it? So Julie said, I'm the founder and CEO of Tigerhall. For those of you who don't know Tigerhall is a change activation system. So we work with enterprises across different sectors, industries to activate change. So think things like ERP implementations, AI adoption, M&A, those kind of changes, and really anything that is driving change. And we support in doing that at large scale more efficiently so that you can leverage the data you have, target very specific stakeholder groups, personalize content for them, get a ton of data and insights, feedback loops, and so on, so that you can course correct, spend less time on manual work, be faster in how you drive change, and achieve those transformation objectives faster. So that's the company that I founded 6 years ago, and that I'm the founder and CEO of today. So this topic, when it comes to AI and data in transformation, why does this matter more now than perhaps any time before? So I know that you're no strangers to this, like you live and breathe this every day, and that's just how much change has increased over the last few years. So 10 years ago, there might have been 1 or 2 changes happening a year, and then we could have this very linear approach, right? Like then we could, okay, let's have a project with a start and an end date, and have consultants come in and execute it and get it done, right? Now, when we're seeing 15, 20, 25 changes happening at the same time, it's really, really hard to drive change and transformation in that same way as we did 10 years ago. So it's this velocity change in the number of change impacts per employee per year that is driving the need to change how we're driving change and transformation as well. So you know that there's more and more change coming up, and that's also what we'll need to change how we're doing it. Because right now, when we look at change and transformation teams, it's a lot of work that goes into manual tasks, right? Like, you know this better than I do, just how much time it takes to just create email distribution lists, or like filtering stakeholder groups, or like all of the spreadsheets that you're managing and all the meetings that you're coordinating, and then pulling survey results together, analyzing it, putting it together for an executive report. Like it's tons and tons of time that just goes into manual work for change practitioners. So there was some research around this that said 27.4 hours a week is the average that a member of a change and transformation team spends on manual work every week. So can we do something else with those 27 hours? That is the question that AI and data can answer in many ways, and that's what we're going to dive into today. So those 27 hours a week, can we do those? Can we spend more time in front of people? Because at the end of the day, driving change is about humans. It's all about humans, and it's easy to forget that when all the conversation is around AI, and that's what we're living day to day. Everything is about AI, but at the end of the day, it is humans that matter. And to effectively drive change, you need to spend the most amount of time with humans, in front of humans, guiding, coaching as possible. And every minute that you spend on an email distribution list or creating content or managing spreadsheets is a minute that you're not spending with humans. So that's the end goal here, is how can we reduce the manual work and lead with more speed and scale using AI and data so that we can be with humans more. So what we're going to cover today, it's a lot that we're going to cover and go through. We're going to look at the landscape shift, like where do we stand today? We're going to spend most of the time on the 6 most high leverage workflows in change and transformation where you can implement AI and data. Then we're going to go into data, like what is the data that you need? Because that tends to be the biggest question, like, oh, AI needs data to work, right? And then agents. I'm not sure if anyone here has started with agents. Put it in the chat if you've started experimenting with agents. Many that I speak with haven't yet, but we're going to cover a little bit of that so you know what's ahead. And then looking at some red flags and pitfalls, and then, of course, the human element and ways to get started. So let's kick off with looking at the landscape and where are we at today? So you're no strangers to this. This is what we've experienced over the last few years. 2018, 2019, there were less people dabbling in this, but then 2022 is when it really, really started with a big inflection point, right? And that was ChatGPT. Like ChatGPT is what unleashed this massive consumer interest and distribution advantage when it comes to AI. And ChatGPT made it accessible. And the fact that it's such an accessible interface is what made it just everyone could use it, right? And then you have that in combination with the multimodal capabilities. So suddenly it wasn't only text, but also image and voice and video with models like VO3 and Gemini and so on. So it moved beyond text. And then the context windows have expanded over time, right? So that's why we're seeing AI being able to do more and more is primarily a combination of these different growth drivers. So the fact that you can do all these multimodal capabilities and have more context and the accessibility that tools like ChatGPT offers, right? It's easy to use. And a lot of this is based on data, right? And when it comes to enterprises, if we move this into enterprise adoption of AI, which is, it's always a conversation like, are people ahead? Are they behind? Like, is the media hype accurate? Are we in a bubble? Is the question that everyone is answering, right? And my personal opinion is that I think AI is overhyped and underhyped at the same time. I think it's overhyped in the sense that it's going to replace everything and everyone and everything is going to change. I think it's underhyped in how much work it can take on, and also that people are judging it based on where it is today. I think that's the biggest problem. People are underhyping it because they look at what can it do today. But when you look at where is it going and how quickly has it moved, what we can do in 5 years is going to be absolutely remarkable. So people always underestimate what you can do in the long run, but overestimate what you can do in the short run. And I think that's where we are with AI today. And of course, data always comes into this, like how can we leverage the data that we have? And the biggest advantage of AI, and this is a little bit of a myth, is that you need a lot of structured data. And a lot of like vendors especially might tell you need structured data. You need it to be in order. You need like all of this like structured data to be able to use AI. That's actually inaccurate, because the big power of AI is that you can use unstructured data. And I think this is the biggest takeaway for change and transformation, because if you think of change and transformation, so much of it is unstructured data. So much of it is sentiment and how people think and feel and stakeholders and things like that. And that's why AI is so powerful, because it's actually making sense of the unstructured data. And when we look at enterprise data, 80% of enterprise data is unstructured. So that means what people are saying in meetings and how they're chatting with each other and all of those things. It's 80% of enterprise data. So you only have 20% that is actually your structured, like CRM and HRIS data. The rest of it is unstructured. And that's the benefit of AI, is that it can tap into all of this 80% and not just be limited to the 20% that you have. So that makes this new stack possible, right? We can have that data foundation, you can have agents on top, then an analytics layer, and that's the way that you can build your transformation stack. So you can automate a lot of the coordination, scale personalization is one of those things that wasn't possible before, a lot of the real-time insights and so on. So if we think of it as data, and then having agents on top of the data, and then that analytics layer, that's the kind of technology stack. I see some questions about audio, just making sure. Can everyone hear me all right? Says audio is fine. Okay, I take it audio is fine. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. But I think when we look at change and transformation and how do we enable more AI, the biggest thing that we need to start with, and this is a lot of conversations I'm having with leaders today, is we need to start with this mindset shift, right? Because many change professionals that I speak with are still viewing themselves as like project managers. And they view themselves as, this is a project that I'm running, it has a start and an end date, and there are certain things you need to do throughout that project. And they think in very linear workflows. And I think the first thing that we need to do as change and transformation professionals is to view ourselves more as system designers. Because if you think of that scalability of change, right, there's no longer one change a year. It's not one project that you can start and end. It's actually 300 different projects happening at the same time. How can you be the system designer of that? How can you orchestrate how those works? How can you build the systems around it rather than treating every single initiative as a project? Because that is what leads to a lot of this maniac and all the craziness in driving change, right? It's just like too much happening at the same time. And you're trying to do the same thing for every single project and put yourself in the project, as opposed to viewing yourself as the system designer of how do we enable this at very large scale. So we're going to talk a little bit about this mindset shift as well, but I think that's important to point out up front that it's not good to take the project mindset and apply AI to that. Because then what's going to happen is you're just going to automate and go faster on things that maybe you shouldn't be doing that same way anyway. So we need to rethink how we think and view ourselves more as those system designers. So we'll get to that a bit too. But first, let's dive into the use cases and where can you actually use AI? And I'll be very curious as we go through these. Feel free to share in the chat, if you've already done this, if you've tried it, what worked, what didn't work, share with the rest of the group on this call as well. We're 150 people in the room, so there's a lot of good insight beyond just me here. So do share in the chat with each other as well. Okay, so these are the 6 we're going to look at. How can you apply AI in communication and training, in sentiment analysis, change load mapping, stakeholder management, activation campaign planning, and transformation planning and decision making? So these are the 6 that we're going to cover. So let's dive in first with content creation. So this is, I would say, probably the most basic, not so rocket science, but one that is very easy to begin with, right? When you think of crafting, creating all that content, multi-format training, communications that go out and so on, this is a hygiene 101 use case for AI. If you're not using AI to create communications and training right now, then change and start using AI for it. This is a huge time saver, right? So looking at things, how can you take the source content that you have? So this might be different decks and different information that you have, and then putting that through AI to then create multiple outputs. Because a big part of driving change successfully is being able to personalize content at very large scale, right? So baking in those WIFMs, what's in it for me, how should different people adopt and see the change and so on. And people respond very differently to when they get communicated to in the way that they want to get communicated to. So the benefit of AI is that you can move from those super boring PDFs and PowerPoints that nobody reads and nobody goes to the SharePoint to read it, right? Can you turn that into podcasts? Can you turn that into videos? Can you translate it? Can you make sure people get it in their local language? Creating content is a very one-on-one use case. So start with this and have that also be personalized. So there are tools that you can use for this, like Notebook LM, Synthesia, and all of these that are like point solutions. Some of our Tigerhall customers have challenges with using them because of privacy and personal data and so on. So you cannot put enterprise information into those systems. Then that's where Tigerhall is a good option because that's completely secure. You can put all those kind of documents into Tigerhall. It automatically creates podcasts, videos, power reads, everything in local language immediately. So you can have one input and it leads to all of these multiple outputs. So think of that when you think of creating communications and training. So that's the first, probably not so rocket science kind of use case. Anyone who is doing this, thing afterwards, anything in the chat? Yes, we will be sharing all the slides after that as well. Exactly. Don't automate inefficient processes. Not good to do. So content creation being number one. And when we look at, this is Tigerhall data, when we look at comparison just between emails and town halls compared to those other formats, when it comes to reaching the audience, engaging the audience, how much of a difference it does when you actually speak to them in the way that they want to be spoken to, and include local language as well. So with English speaking audiences, podcasts, very popular, for example, non-English video is bigger. So this just shows how much more effective it goes to reach them. Sentiment analysis, another thing. So this is when it comes to how do you understand what people are thinking, saying, feeling, right? And sentiment is all about that unstructured data. So you have this data in tools like Microsoft Teams, Slack, email. You can, of course, do surveys. If you use a change activation platform, you have all of this inside a change activation platform too. And this is where AI is super effective in quickly collating those answers, right? And looking at all of the survey results are just like what people are saying in a chat, what people are saying in meetings. And if you feed AI things like both meeting recordings, meeting notes, survey responses, chats, and so on, it can very accurately depict different sentiment. And I recommend having this in a GPT where you can continue prompting it as well, so that you can continue adding it to this GPT project and then continue asking questions and continue asking about specific audiences and so on. And then generating those summaries. So sentiment analysis, another great one, and just dump all the information into it, right? The more the better. Again, doesn't need to be structured. Unstructured works equally well. Third one is when we look at the change load mapping and impact assessment. So this is a big thing that tends to take a lot of time. When I speak with change teams, a ton of time goes into change impact assessments. And sometimes it's hard to do this with AI up front, but you can definitely do it with AI as you go through the change. So you might still need to do a little bit of an impact assessment up front, but then when you start implementing the actual change, you can use AI to determine this. And something that AI is really good at is understanding the types of impact in different audiences. So if you look at this one, this is small, you'll get the slides afterwards. And this is based on AdCar, for example. So if you use AdCar for going through change, you can map AdCar to the types of changes that people are going through and just add everything that they're doing within that change, including their communications, their training, their data, their workflow changes, their process mapping, add all of that together. And AI can actually tell you that this team is going through more of a compensation change or more of a process change, or it's more about mindsets and beliefs. So these type of impact maps where you can see the change impact per audience is something you can definitely do with AI. And also things like change load. So being able to capture at what time is it best to launch different initiatives with different audiences. So seeing that the product team is super busy in May, but then there's nothing happening in June and July, and then a lot again in August. So maybe we should launch this with them in June and July, or maybe avoid doing something in August. This is another really good use of AI. So that enables you to plan better. How do you avoid change fatigue, which is a major issue? How do you avoid overloading people? And how do you ensure that you get the maximum adoption of your change? Because the way to get maximum adoption is, yes, doing it well, communicate well, make sure that they get the training and support that they need, but also doing it at the right time. Like you cannot drive an ERP implementation on Christmas Day, right? Like regardless of how good your ERP implementation strategy is, if you try to do it on Christmas Day, no one is going to do it. So that kind of planning is another good use case for AI, if you haven't done that yet. Number 4, a little bit related to sentiment analysis, so things like stakeholder management, influence mapping, again, using that unstructured data. If you have access to Microsoft Graph, this is something you can do with Microsoft Graph API. So if you speak with your IT team, it's called the Microsoft Graph API, and that gives you access to everyone in the organization. So the maximum level of Microsoft Graph API will allow you to read your CEO's emails, and they're probably not as interesting as you think they are. And then there are all types of access levels from 0 to that, right? Most wouldn't give like specific, like different like email access or things like that, but you can usually get team access and seeing how different teams are influencing each other, and sometimes leadership levels and things like that. So the first time you ask your IT team, they will always say no, 100%, 10 out of 10 times, and then you can ask again and again and again. So it requires a little bit of pushing, but it is very, very powerful data. And that's where you can map out like some of these hidden influential network, you can see that Michael speaks a lot with Sarah, for example. Like that's a connection point that you can then use in mapping out your change champion networks and influencers. So it's a good way to identify these more informal leaders and who's actually having influence with who. So that's another use case. And the fifth one, AI-powered campaign planning. So this goes a little bit more into agentic AI when it comes to testing, deciding, iterating on the go, and so on. So when we think of campaign planning, take a change activation campaign, right? And when it comes to testing, so both like generating the content, testing and optimization, and then iterating on that, that's where AI can be very powerful. This is a little bit more of an advanced use case because it requires those agents and deploying agents that can actually assess the feedback as well, and then iterate based on that. So it's kind of like chain GPTs, where you would have one that starts with just creating the content, and then that content goes into deployment, testing different audiences, different styles. And then based on the feedback and response data, that's when you have another GPT that would then feed into the personalized content creation again. So this is something that you can start testing. If you've already done all the other use cases and you want to go to the next level, this is a good one to go to next. And this is where you can automate this end-to-end to make it hyper-personalized, super quick, and get the right message to the right person at the right time, and doing a lot of this A/B testing happening at scale as well. So that's another use case. And again, this is a little bit more advanced, but happy to spend one-to-one time and go through exactly how you can set it up and how it works as well. So just let me know, and I'm happy to go deeper. And then we have the planning and decision making. So this is something, again, that a lot of people are using AI for, where you can have simulations of different scenarios. So this usually goes with things like your planning tools or like financial tools. If you're using something like an Anaplan or similar finance management systems, you can usually leverage AI on top of those to see different scenarios and compare different scenarios. Because one thing that is good with AI that I don't think a lot of people use it for is to do things with AI that are hypothetical. So you can tell AI, right? Like if we take it to a personal example, let's say I'm gonna go for a walk, and I tell ChatGPT like, hey, I just went for a walk. So I just went for a walk and this happened, a dog bit me and the tree fell down and so on. What should I do now? Then ChatGPT might tell me, okay, you should go to the doctor and check that you're not infected by the dog who bit you. You should go check on the tree, da, da, da. And then I can have a different GPT telling, hey, I just went for a walk and it was sunny outside. It was beautiful. I met a neighbor who said great things. What should I do now? And then ChatGPT will tell you, oh, now go build a relationship with that neighbor, da, 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 and enjoy the sun today, for example. So that's what you can do with scenario planning as well, right? So you can trick the GPT into thinking that this already happened. So you tell it, my ERP implementation went to absolute shit. No one is adopting the ERP we're implementing. So what should I do now? Or we have this merger that we did a year ago. And now 12 months later, this is already, no one is getting along. No one is enjoying speaking to each other. We have all these silos. No one is collaborating. What should I do now? And then you might be at the start of that M&A, but you pretend with your AI, you trick the AI into thinking you're 1 year later. So that's a lot of things you can do around scenario comparison and scenario planning as well. So because AI have no connection to reality, right? So you can just tell it what reality is. So there are a lot of things you can do around that when it comes to transformation planning, which can be quite fun as well. And you can play around with it a lot depending on different scenarios and see if you're in scenario A, what does AI recommend you to do compared to if you tell it you're in scenario B. And then also decision making, that goes a little bit together with that, right? Like if you do that scenario planning, I went for a walk, and then you tell it what to do, then you can also combine those two and then tell AI, hey, I have these two different scenarios. What should you do? And tell me how to make decisions. So you can also then aggregate all of that data together with that scenario planning and get decision making and AI generated recommendations. Then of course, always exercise human judgment. AI does still hallucinate a lot, and they do a lot of things wrong, and they still don't know the number of R's in strawberry, and 1 + 1 is 11, right? So take it with a bit of caution, but treat it as a super intelligent intern is probably the right way to look at it. So you still exercise your judgment, but decision making is something you can play around with it as well. And then my favorite is actually this. One of the biggest things in change and transformation that I think is one of the biggest challenges is sustainment of change. Because I see this all the time where change and transformation teams might be great with launching things. There are new things that are coming out and they put all the resources in that. But then once that's launched, then they move on to the next shiny thing, right? And this is not the change and transformation team's fault. This is just the nature of business, right? But the resources required to sustain change are usually zero. And executives usually go, oh, but we've already launched it. Like, why do you need resources for sustainment, right? So when it comes to making sure that these things stay, and especially when it comes to technology adoption, we probably, everyone on this call has launched technology and then people go back to some manual writing or their old Excel sheets and things like that. And you usually get anything to make sure that people sustain it. And this is my favorite use case of AI, is to make sure that you sustain change. Because if you implement something like take an ERP, right? We all know that sustaining an ERP is like a 2-3 year project. But many executives treat it as a 6-month project. Okay, people just need to launch and it's done once, right? And even if it's things like M&A or like, I mean, take AI adoption as well, like people can be super excited at the beginning, but then sustaining that over time is a lot more challenging. So what can you do here? So if you connect AI, and this is again one of those I'm happy to go into more detail in a one-to-one on, if you connect AI to those workflow systems, so let's go back to an ERP. I feel like everyone is doing a new ERP at the moment, so it's a close to mind, top of mind use case. So if we take the ERP, you can connect AI to the ERP to see what are people doing and not doing. So what workflow actions are they taking? What workflow actions are they not taking? What are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? Who's avoiding it? If you combine all of that data, AI can then actually serve up the right nudges at the right time. So it's a combination of AI and automation, right? Like there's an underlying automation layer, but then with AI on top of it. And if you combine that with things like sentiment analysis and all the other unstructured data points that we've been talking about, take those in combination, you can actually have a super effective reinforcement system that operates entirely without you. And many of these things can be pretty simple, right? Just a simple nudge like, hey, it's month end and we see that you haven't submitted your expenses in the new system. Like just something simple as that. You can actually set all of that up once. And maybe you do that when you have your first like 3 to 6 months implementation timeline, right? You end that project with setting all of these things up. And then you can also track as people go along, oh, like this month we send a nudge to submit expenses to 800 people. Next month, it was 600 people. So 200 people are actually doing it now. And then you might see that going down over time as well. So there's a lot of things you can do here to drive that sustainment over time. And again, happy to spend one-to-one time on how you can do this exactly too, because it's also one of those a little bit more advanced cases as well. And yeah, exactly, Tracy, they never understand post-implementation. No one understands post-implementation. And that's the most critical. Everyone just focus on that milestone, the go live date, when we're launching to everyone, then what happens after that? And that's when all the ROI goes down, right? So yeah, so this is my favorite. Okay, moving into data. What is the data that we need? So we've already spoken about that structured or not doesn't matter. Unstructured data is actually more powerful for AI. You don't need it to be structured. If someone is telling you that, they're probably trying to sell you some structured data solution. Unstructured is king. And what are the most effective data sources then that we can look into? So Microsoft Graph, we already spoke about this. So the Microsoft Graph API, go to your IT teams and ask them about it. SharePoint is actually a pretty good data source. The downside sometimes of SharePoint is that it's too much. And I know many organizations that have like 56,000 SharePoint sites, and it's too much and it's too old. And so what you might want to do here, what is usually more effective, is that you limit it. So you look at certain SharePoint sites or certain parts of it. You don't go and like leverage AI across all your SharePoint, right? Because that might also be too much, depending on the use case and depending on what you want to do with it. HRIS, good if that's updated. Most organizations don't have very good HRIS data, but it's still like better than an Excel sheet. But this is where you can find some good information as well. That's more on the structured side. You have things like learning systems, Slack, Teams, like this goes back to that Microsoft Graph, and also all sort of feedback tools. So what I recommend is just grabbing everything and collecting as much of it, like in whatever format that is, and just take it all together to feed into whatever AI you're using and GPTs you've set up and so on. So, but don't underestimate unstructured, and don't spend a lot of time on trying to structure it. Like there's a lot of firms out there right now that do like data cleansing and data mapping and like doing all of that work. It's actually not as needed for AI as you might think. The thing is, you need accurate data, but it doesn't need to be structured. So that's the difference, right? Like structure is something else, but accuracy, like if it says that Nelly is 160 years old, that's not going to be accurate data. So the accuracy is something that is required, but not necessarily the structure. But tap into what you've already got. That's a good place to start. So yeah, like voice recordings is another good one. Like take all the, we all record our meetings now. Like everything we do is recorded. And this is the other thing, and I find this a bit of a sidetrack, but I find this very interesting that AI came at the time it did after the pandemic. Because I think the pandemic is such a big accelerator to AI, because the fact that we went completely digital in 2020 and suddenly everything was on chat platforms and we recorded all our meetings and everything was digital. I really wonder what AI would have looked like without those years of pandemic digitalism, where everything was digitized. Because it's really hard to apply, and this is where a lot of organizations are still struggling, because it's really hard to apply AI to a fax machine, right? You cannot take fax data and implement into an AI system. And equally, if you operate in a relationship organization, and the way that you work is knocking on Susan's door and going, hey, Susan, I need this, or hey, Bob, what do you think of this? That's so much harder for AI. So this is why also when you look at like remote startups that are super AI native and so on, is because we have everything digitized. Like Tigerhall was founded in 2019. So 2020, when everyone went remote, basically 95% of Tigerhall's history is digitized. We don't have any knocking on Susan's door or like old paper things flying around, right? We have the whole company history digitized. And I think that's interesting with where AI is now, because you have a lot of this, like you have town halls recorded, you have Q&A sessions, you have like co-pilots summarizing all the meetings. So now that there is so much more of our day-to-day work and collaboration that's digitized, use that in these use cases with change and transformation. So use that for that sentiment analysis and stakeholder mapping and personalizing communication. There's so much you can do here. So I just think that's interesting around how the pandemic probably accelerated a big part of the AI efficiencies that we're seeing today, because just the workplace is digitized. And I think that's a struggle if you're in a workplace that isn't as digitized, like maybe people are still picking up the phone and calling each other, then you're not going to have as rich data for AI compared to a fully digitized organization. But yeah, tap into those sources. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about agents. Was there anyone who had started with agents? Put it in the chat. If there's anyone who has agent experience. Save has. What have you applied agents to? Anyone want to put in the chat what agent applications you've done? We can learn again. But yeah, this tends to be a little bit after Gen AI. So mostly what we've been speaking about so far is Gen AI and analytics and so on, right? Agents, if we start with like, what is agents? You're learning agents now, Gemini gems, AI browser Comet. Okay. Silicon sampling, curfew agents. Awesome. Yeah, so I think you're where most people are. Like it's still very early with agents. People are still trying to get the Gen AI side right before you can apply agents. So what's the difference between Gen AI and agents, right? The difference is primarily around decision making and the fact that you give it a goal and then it executes that goal, and that it can change. So depending on what you tell it to do, if the agent itself thinks that this is not a good way, we should actually do it this way, it will do so, sometimes without human in the loop, without your approval, depending on how you build it. But it's basically worked around, you set a goal, and then the agent makes its own plan for how to achieve that goal, and then it also executes and it adapts. So that's why the use case 5 that we spoke about when it comes to adaptation in making sure that you have that personalized communication and training and change management, the way that you can deploy agents there is because you have that adaptation. So that requires the feedback to come back in, and then for the agents to then take that feedback and adapt the communication in the next cycle that goes out. So that's the last step of agents, is that adaptation side. There are a few different frameworks that you can use to build agents. I know like Microsoft is launching many of these things as well. We can go and do like agent building. Salesforce have some of them. If you want to build your own, these are the different frameworks, and it depends a bit on what kind of tasks do you want to give the agents. So you have Auto GPT, for example, which is more like complex research. You can tell it, give it a goal to go research something. Crew AI is something that is more like process driven. And if you have multiple agents that need to work together, like that campaign planning example, one agent has to create the content, another agent has to distribute it, a third agent has to adapt it. That's where frameworks like Crew are popular. And then you have chat dev, which is a little bit more like engineering specific. So that's more software development teams. So it comes down more to like coding and testing different software applications. So I would say for use cases in change and transformation, mostly AutoGDP and Crew AI are the frameworks that you would use for those. But also you can use tools like Microsoft and Salesforce and build it on top of those platforms too. So when we think of it, right, like if we take some examples closer to home and change and transformation, if you combine different specialized agents, think of it as kind of like chain GPTs. And I think the word agent also makes it a little bit like people go, oh, it's a whole like person and they can do things on their own. But if you think of it as like chain GPTs, it's a little bit closer to the truth. So if you have like multiple chat GPTs combined, telling each other what to do, that's in some essence what chain GPTs are. So you can have one GPT for campaign planning. So maybe the campaign planning, this is where you just input all your strategy documents, you have your change impact assessment, you have the different stakeholder groups, like what is the messaging framework, what are you using? Is it ADKAR or Cotter? Like what change method are you using? So you can have one GPT just taking all of the strategy documents and documentation that you have about the change, and then building that into a campaign, into an activation campaign. So you could start with that and just have that as a campaign plan GPT, so that you don't have to sit and look at our audiences, what is the change, what are the change impact, and then build out, okay, who needs what communication when, and what training, and how should we deliver that? Like, you don't need to do that, right? So that could be your campaign planner GPT. So let's say you have that. The key here when you think of agents overall is if you're doing these chain GPTs or agents, that the output of the first is the input of the next. So when you think of how you structure agents, think of like, so in this case, right, the output here, now we have a campaign structure. So we have a campaign structure for this is how we want to roll this out to the different audiences. That campaign structure is your input to your next agent, which is your localization GPT. So you now make sure that your localization GPT gets this campaign structure, and then it takes that campaign structure that you have for your entire organization worldwide, and now that GPT adapts it to different languages and cultures. And how do you roll this out in Japan compared to Mexico, right? Because hopefully you're not rolling out change the same way as in Japan and Mexico. If you do, there are a few other things we need to do before you can do a localization GPT, but you should localize it to different regions. So that then becomes your output. So now you have localized content, because this GPT takes it, it translates it, it adapts it, and so on. Now the output you have here, now we have the localized content, that becomes your input for your scheduling GPT. So now this is your third agent. And this is the GPT that then optimizes the delivery timing, making sure that it gets to them at the right time in the right time zone. I still know so many American organizations that send emails at 2 p.m. Eastern and not caring that that lands at 2 a.m. in Singapore, right? So just something simple as like time zone optimization and sending messaging at the right time, that is really, really critical. And that also avoids change fatigue when you look at it from a longer perspective, right? Like maybe this week, someone is in a leadership offsite. That's not a good time to send a reinforcement campaign around ERP implementation, for example. Like that's not a good way to do it, right? So you want to make sure that you optimize based on people's calendars. Their PTO is another thing, like super simple. Like you have all the PTO data, still so many change teams are not optimizing based on when people are on PTO. So people come back from PTO, the last thing they're going to do is to care about your change messaging. But if you give them 2 days to clear their inbox, and then on day 3 of coming back, that's when you give them a reinforcement message, much, much higher change adoption. So there are very simple things you can do around the scheduling GPT as well and feed it with that data. So that's when you then have localized content going in, and output is your complete delivery calendar. And then it can go and schedule and send those things out as well. So this is an example of those like agent/chain GPTs where you can actually just connect. You create 3 different ones. One is focused on one particular part of the process, and then the output of one becomes the input of the next. So that's an example just of how do we roll out change communications, training campaigns, reinforcement, nudges, all of these things. So again, happy to spend time on this if that's helpful. And you want to be very specific about deciding where do you implement agents. I don't think we're at a place yet where we can deploy agents everywhere and anyone can use it and we can do it across all our use workflows. You want to think about what are the workflows where you might have multi-steps. So like the one we just went through with activation, campaign planning, and distribution, where you have a few different steps. You ideally want to start agents where it's already very repetitive, like repetitive coordination, and it's a clear outcome, right? And also where you already have quite a bit of context. So if you think of things like rolling out a change communications campaign or activation campaign, you already have the stakeholder groups, you already have the impact assessment, you have this, right? Like where you have a lot of this context, that's another good place to start. Now, eventually, the more you use agents, the more they can operate in more like ambiguous environments as well. But I recommend to start where it's pretty clear, it's pretty repetitive, you know what a good outcome looks like, and you have a lot of context for it to work with. So that's where things like change communications is a good one to start with. That's the example we just went through. Stakeholder feedback analysis, but again, always exercise human judgment because I've seen some of this go awry as well. And like I've seen one was doing this with stakeholder analysis and they swapped 2 people. So like Susan became Bob and Bob became Susan. So that can happen as well. And that's not a good outcome, right? So always exercise caution. And then training and knowledge management, like answering questions. Like this is a big use case right now that people are applying, especially in customer service, right? Like answering questions, seeing knowledge gaps, helping people along, guiding, reinforcement, nudges, and so on. So that's where agents are really good if you can identify some of those use cases. And where they're not as good, where you don't want to apply agents, is where things are very ambiguous. So if it's still unclear, if you don't know the outcome, if you don't know what the objective is, if it's not very specific and measurable what you want out of this, like don't put an agent on it yet. We might be there in 1, 2, 3 years, but I wouldn't start with where it's very ambiguous. And then always make sure that you have a human in the loop right now, because they do still make a ton of mistakes. And it's incredible what they can do, but it's also many things that, like, it's not, but like it's not correlative, right? So for example, like the 1 + 1 = 11 is a good example of where for us it's so basic, but AI is not operating at our level of like what's basic and what's advanced. So the way that humans think, like we can easily count the number of R's in strawberry and we can easily add 1 + 1, but then AI can do things that are so much more advanced than that, but they cannot do very basic tasks. So that's why supervision is so key. And then when you have handoffs, this is where a lot of things go wrong with agents as well. So take that example that I gave with the three different GPTs. If you have the first one with the output being the campaign, if that's a messy handoff going into the localization, you might end up localizing the whole thing wrong, right? Like it might be that whatever you decided to deploy in Mexico actually now comes out in Japan in Mandarin language. Like it can go completely awry if that handoff is wrong. So what I recommend is to have a human in the loop and have that supervision, especially during the handoffs. So that means, if I go back a couple of slides here, if you have this campaign structure, have a human look at this and approve it before you put it into the localization GPT. Because I've seen people put these together and then it's wrong already up here. And then you end up delivering something in a completely wrong country, in the wrong language, at the wrong time, and everything just becomes super, super messy by the third point. So when you think of where do you input humans, look at that in between here. So for example, like in Tigerhall, you have this campaign planner, content creation, then we have approval flows where it's actually a human approving it before it goes out into localizing it. So there's a second step where it then adapts to different regions and languages, because I think that's still important to have humans in the loop here. So avoid the messy handoffs here. Okay, moving on to some red flags and pitfalls in all of this and all of what we've spoken about. So the most common mistakes I still hear, like deploy Copilot and call it AI transformation, still happens. Copilot is not all there is, and Copilot might not be the right type for you, right? I see many organizations go deploy Copilot and then say, oh, Copilot wasn't right, so let's not do AI at all. And they think Copilot is everything there is. It's not. So think about what are the workflows where you can actually apply it. I highly recommend going vertical before you go horizontal. So think vertical, what are the key workflows that make your business successful? And can you apply to those? Because it's not very big ROI on having everyone write slightly better emails or summarizing meeting notes. So a lot of effort goes into these very low value use cases. And then you invest millions in having everyone write better emails, but actually that doesn't change the top line or the bottom line of the business. So focus on redesigning around like what are the key processes that actually make a difference in your business and put more effort there. So it's the 80-20 rule again, right? Like don't try to apply AI in like a little bit everywhere, but go deep where it matters is much more effective. And then I've seen a lot of companies go apply AI to processes that actually they shouldn't be doing it that way in the first place. So rather than starting with AI and thinking about how can we now change our entire workflow, they just apply AI to the existing workflow that they have. But as everything in life, it starts with what is the underlying process, right? So when you start thinking of where to apply AI, don't think about AI application first, but start with, okay, what is it that we're actually doing? And if we have AI, how can we change the way we're doing this entirely? And maybe some things we don't do at all. We don't have to even do it in the first place, because it's very much that automate rubbish, you get high-speed rubbish, right? And nobody wants high-speed rubbish. So making sure that you look at the underlying processes. And then again, like don't start with AI. Like everyone that says they have an AI strategy is like, there shouldn't be anything like an AI strategy. It should be a business strategy of how you serve your customers and how you build products and services that serve them and solve their problems. And then if AI can help you do that, great. But not AI strategy. So not having this tool first approach, which boards and CEOs are the first ones to make this mistake, right? Because they go into boardrooms and go like, oh, what's our AI strategy? And then that trickles down the entire organization. And then one-time training, like that never works as well. Like you want to have these continuous feedback loops and always be learning and start small, testing, adoption, and drive the value. So making sure that you have the process, the underlying process needs to be clean before you do anything else. And then you have the big problem, right? When it comes to AI is this one-size-fits-none activation. So people think that we're going to implement AI and we can go out and do it the same way with very high AI readiness engineers as our completely incompetent C-suite, right? Who doesn't know how to open an email. So that's where you have to personalize. And you have to tailor everything to very role-specific needs. And what many people underestimate is like senior executives are so terrible at this. Absolutely awful. I will tell you a story that made me realize this more than anything. I was in Silicon Valley a few months ago, as I am regularly, meeting investors and so on. And I was meeting with a managing partner of one of the largest, most prestigious venture capital funds in the Valley. And we spent 2 hours together. And he was talking about AI, this and that. And he was so like bullish on AI, right? I mean, the whole Valley is just trying to get into these 20 companies, right? It's OpenAI, Anthropic, Lovable, Cursor, like everyone wants to invest in them. So he was so bullish about AI. And then I started showing him like what I'm doing, like not even Tigerhall, right? Not even Tigerhall's AI, but my personal use of AI. So I started showing him stuff on ChatGPT that I was doing. And he looked and he was like, what app is this? And I was like, are you for real? Like, he literally asked me, what app is this? And I couldn't believe it. I was like, I had this like out of body experience. I'm like, are you for real? Like, you're asking me what app this is? And he was not using it. He's the managing partner of one of the biggest AI investors in the world, one of the biggest funds. He didn't know. And that's the same with like CEOs that go out in town halls and say AI this, AI that, and everything. Like, ask them like how they're using it, or just show them what you're doing, and they might ask you, oh, what app is that? So never overestimate, as much as your executives talk the big game, never underestimate how terrible they actually are with it. And many think that, we need to start at the top and lead from the front. And I think part of that is true. But I also think part of it is like, sometimes you just cannot make, like, you can take the dog to water, but you cannot make it drink, or what the saying is. So I wouldn't over rely on executives. I would focus more like, we don't need the CEO to be on all of these tools all the time, right? Like, but just don't think that they will be, because many times they're not. So adapting it to all these different levels of digital readiness, including the C-suite, is very key. And the C-suite are usually the worst. But if you go to your technical teams or engineers, or take like Gen Z, a big bank in Europe that I was with a few weeks ago, I was with a chief transformation officer, and this is a bank with like 10,000 people. And he had just spent 3 months with one of the top 3 consulting firms, put in millions of dollars into this 3-month engagement with the consulting firm, right? Then he organized 1-day hackathon with the Gen Zs of the bank. So he put together all of these Gen Zs, and he said, the value that I got out of 1 day with our Gen Zs was 10x of those millions of dollars that I spent on that very prestigious consulting firm for 3 months. So don't underestimate the value of going to different parts of your organization, engaging bottom up, going to frontline staff, engaging the younger folks, and don't wait for your C-suite to be ready, because they will be the slowest, and they will ask you, maybe even in 5 years, they will ask you, what app is that? So don't wait for them, just go ahead. And then critical feedback loops. When you don't have feedback, then adoption drops. We spoke about sustainment and how critical that is. So if you don't have sustainment, really, really hard to drive change adoption over time. So that's a big thing to avoid as well. And then trust is the biggest thing. And I don't actually have a good answer to this. I was on a panel with Adam Schreiber, who's a part of the ECLC and leads transformation for PepsiCo. And we spoke about this trust in AI, right? And how that is the biggest challenge when it comes to driving output, because AI is still at that space where, the 1 + 1 = 11, and then people just don't trust it. And this is where a lot of the enablement and training also comes from, like, what can AI do and what can it not do? And that's why I emphasize things like, don't use it for this. Like, don't deploy agents here. Like, don't deploy AI in these areas. So make sure that you input it like where people can trust it, and then go like bit by bit to build that trust. But this is still hard. And this is where I think the hype doesn't help, because the more we hype it, the more higher people's expectations are. And then the more the expectations are going to be not met. Now, human element in all of this, because we want to do all of this to spend more time with humans. And I think that's so important to emphasize, that it's about how can we spend more time with each other, drive more collaboration, be more in front of humans. It's not about replacing humans, but be able to do more. And people who think that like people are going to get replaced and jobs are going to get replaced and so on, yes, they 100% will be. But it's the same as when, how there were people like 100 years ago that went and put on the gasoline in the street lights every evening. So every evening when it got dark, they went and put on the street lights manually with gasoline. So there were like guys who did that in every single village around the world, right? And then electricity came. So yes, there are going to be people who are losing their jobs 100%. But I think at the end of this, it's going to be, we're going to be more powerful. We're going to be able to do more with less, and spend more time with humans ultimately. Because I don't know anyone who loves spending time on email distribution lists or building an executive report. Like, can we just do less of that and focus more on being together and being with each other? But many people have these fears, right? Like a lot of people rightly think that, yeah, AI will take their job. And I think we should just be transparent and tell them, yes, it will in some areas. It 100% will. And this is how you can adapt. And some people will not be able to adapt. And that is reality. And we need to think of other ways to support them. But I really believe that radical transparency is the key here. And openly communicate, like, what are you doing? What is the purpose behind AI? If the purpose is to, we're going to cut our customer service department in half, tell them that. There is no reason not to, because they're going to assume it anyways. And just being transparent always helps. And then if you're intending to retain them, but repurpose them in different ways, upskilling them in different ways. A large consumer goods company actually did this really well, where they positioned all of this under the umbrella, we're investing in you. So they spend time with people who are like upskilling them in data science, in AI, and like all of this focus to make sure that they could have roles with or without that company. So like within or outside the company. So they said, you might not have a job with us, but if you don't have a job with us, these skills will enable you to get a job somewhere else. And that was absolutely remarkable. And this is a large consumer goods giant. And they were very much spending this time on just like, we want to make sure that you're successful, even if we cannot provide you with a job. So that's another way to do it, right? And then you have champion networks, like encouraging that peer-to-peer learning, the grassroots. Again, don't have to go top down, but start from the bottom. But it is important to address it and be transparent about the intentions. And refocusing people, right? So instead of spending all of this time on manual, repetitive tasks, can we focus people more on what they should be doing instead? And I think this is the biggest miss in my view in all of this AI conversation, is that everyone speaks a lot about replacing people and what people shouldn't do, and like no more manual work and no more repetitive tasks, but no one speaks about what should you be doing instead. And I think that's so important to speak about what should you be spending your time on, what is important. And there's not nearly enough time being spent on communicating that. And I think that is the part that makes people excited. Because if you go to people and tell them, like, you're going to spend more time on executive coaching, and maybe that's not as exciting with a CEO who doesn't know ChatGPT, but some people might find that exciting. You're going to spend more time on innovation. You're going to spend more time with humans. You're going to spend more time experimenting, talking to people about what they're going to do now instead of just what they're not going to do. I think is the biggest thing that we need to focus on. And when people say, like, you're going to be able to do more with less, and you're going to be able to do this, and like, make it tangible, make it concrete. Tell them exactly, this is what we want you to spend time on. Now you can only spend 5% of your time there, and we want you to spend 20% of your time there. And be tangible about tactically what are those tasks. So that's where I think more communication time should go into, rather than what they shouldn't do, but rather what are they focused on now. And there are still things that AI can't do, right? Like trust building to a certain extent, like trust is more powerful between humans. Political navigation, as much as we hate it, it's 80% of the job in a large enterprise is to navigate politics. And AI is still not as good as navigating politics as humans are. Executive alignment, storytelling, and there are many other things here that AI can't do yet, that being human is making the biggest difference in. So maybe political navigation becomes your expertise moving forward. And maybe it already is, and that's how you're succeeding in the first place. But then doubling down on that could be one of those things in the world of AI. So overall, we want to shift our time, right? So looking at time allocation, traditionally, you might spend like 40% of your time on administrative tasks. Can we bring that down to 15? It's always going to be there in some way, but can we bring it down to 15? And then again, talk to people about what is that part. So this 50%, can that go into strategic work? And things like insight, synthesis, seeing like what are the patterns, connecting the dots. This is usually very exciting for people to be able to spend more time here to connect the dots and connect patterns. Spending time in front of people, spending more time with humans, critical, and then looking at that design. So overall, how are we designing these systems? That's really where more time should go, and then less time on email distribution lists and building content and all of these things that AI now does a really good job at. So there are some new skills for change leaders to focus on, like curation, coaching, critical thinking, prompt engineering. So diving deeper into these. And when it comes to getting started, starting with identifying that friction. So look at what are some high friction workflows that you can start looking into, and then designing the AI after you've identified the workflow. Not start with the AI, start with a workflow, and then pilot and measure as you go. So start small. So start with a little bit of experimentation, and then see what works, what doesn't work, double down on what works, and then always iterate. Always iterate and adapt as you go. So when you look at then the transformation stack, you have the human oversight, the human in the loop, you have governance, of course, always, workflows, data connectors, and all the AI tools being at the very core of that transformation stack as well. So looking at ultimately, what we want to do is move away from that traditional static linear model to how can we build a more modern circular model where it is more dynamic, more continuous, because change is continuous, transformation is continuous. So how do we build an operating model that is built around real-time information, real-time feedback, using AI and technology to do this much better at scale? So moving from the project manager to more of a system architect, I think, is the role for transformation leaders moving forward. So that's in a nutshell what I wanted to cover today. I know there's a ton of content. You're all going to get the slides. I'm more than happy to spend more time and go deeper into use cases and setting up agents and like anything that you want to do. So feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'm here as a resource for you. So feel free to reach out, and thanks again for taking the time and taking this hour today. I really appreciate you coming here, and have a good rest of your day, and see you soon.